Have you ever heard this story before? In 1949, a Zionist Jew of German descent named Meyer Max Bennett was sent on a mission to Iraq by the Mossad. There, he connected with another Mossad agent, Yusuf Basri, and planned a series of attacks on Iraqi Jews, providing him with maps, instructions, and very specific orders to terrorize the Jewish population. From 1950 to 1951, a wave of bombings struck the Jewish community in Iraq. Cafes, mechanic shops, and synagogues were all targeted by grenades and TNT explosives. These attacks coincided with underground Zionist groups calling for Iraqi Jews to leave for Israel for their safety. The wave of false flag terrorist attacks succeeded in forcing Iraqi Jews to migrate to Israel. Jews had lived in Iraq for thousands of years, but in just 2 years, nearly all 130,000 Iraqi Jews were gone. This forced exodus helped Israel with its demographic issues in the early stages of its existence, as it desperately needed Middle Eastern Jews to help shore up its population, since Ashkenazi Jews were not enough to compete demographically with the indigenous Palestinian population. These terrorist attacks on Iraqi Jews are just one example of a long list of Israel's use of false flag terrorist attacks to achieve its political goals. For his involvement in the terror attacks, Yusuf Basri was arrested by Iraqi police and later executed. Max Bennett, the German Jewish Mossad agent, managed to escape and later helped organize an even larger false flag terror attack in Egypt. In 1952, Bennett traveled to Egypt, again using his identity as a German businessman, and spent 2 years recruiting agents. This time, however, he presented himself as an innocent, harmless businessman doing God's work by producing equipment for the disabled. Wow, what an incredibly charitable and generous man, dedicating his life to helping the disabled. In reality, he was setting up Operation Susanna, a false flag operation in which Jews would plant bombs inside Egyptian, American, and British-owned civilian targets like cinemas, libraries, and American educational centers. The intention was to blame the Muslim Brotherhood and Egyptian communists for the attacks, with the hope that the violence would force British troops occupying the Suez Canal to remain in place instead of handing over control to Egyptian forces. Just like in Iraq, Israel gave the go-ahead for its agents to carry out these terror attacks. Explosions rocked Alexandria and Cairo, but the operation fell short of its intended scope of damage when one of the agents flipped and informed Egyptian authorities. Egyptian authorities then went on to catch one Jewish agent in the act while he was attempting to bomb the British-owned Rio Theater in Cairo. As a result, Egyptian intelligence arrested several undercover Jewish agents, including Max Bennett. When it became clear that he would be executed for his involvement, Bennett committed suicide. The failed operation later became known as the infamous Lavon affair. Israel denied any involvement in the Egyptian and Iraqi false flag terror attacks, but was later exposed. First in 2005, when the Israeli president awarded surviving agents from the Lavon affair certificates of appreciation. And again in 2023, when British-Israeli historian Avi Schleim spoke directly to a Jewish agent who had been part of the Zionist underground in Baghdad and who provided evidence that Israel was behind the attacks on Iraqi Jews. There are numerous reports of false flag operations over the decades serving Israel's interests, including direct and indirect involvement in terrorist attacks. This history alone is enough to justify speculative claims about more recent or even modern attacks being Israeli false flags. Not only is there the Israeli connection to 9/11, but just a month later, on October 10th, 2001, 2 Israelis were caught with Pakistani passports, grenades, explosives, and guns inside the Mexican parliament just moments before trying to carry out a massive terrorist attack on Mexican officials. Their intention, of course, was to blame it on Muslims in a climate that was already incredibly paranoid and fearful of Islam. The Israeli government rushed to help impose a media blackout on the failed plot and pressured the Mexican government to quietly release their Jewish agents. The media blackout is one of the reasons why you've never heard of this operation before, but we know about it because Mexican newspapers at the time covered it in detail. In just this year, in February of 2025, an explosion destroyed 3 buses in Bat Yam in occupied Palestine. Israeli authorities claimed that 2 Palestinian terrorists had carried out the attack. Zionists went into a frenzy calling Palestinians terrorists for attempting to kill civilians at a time when they were actively committing genocide in Gaza. However, as soon as it was revealed that it was actually 2 Jewish Israelis who had planted the bombs and detonated them, the government ordered a blackout and all reporting on the case was shut down. Israeli false flags don't always have to actually include violence. Sometimes, just the threat of it is enough. During Trump's first term, thousands of bomb threats were called into Jewish communities in the United States and around the world. Threats that the ADL and other groups used as evidence that anti-Semitism was on the rise. It later turned out, however, that every single one of these threats was made by a Jewish American Israeli. A Jewish American Israeli teenager arrested for making 2,000 anti-Semitic bomb threats against Jewish community centers across the US, is also accused of attempting to extort a Republican senator who spoke out against the hoax bomb threats. The teen went so far as to order drugs to the senator's home while threatening to release allegedly incriminating photos, according to a Justice Ministry spokesperson. And he wasn't just targeting American institutions. 561 out of the 2,000 calls were made to Australian Jewish community centers and schools. Speaking of Australia, there have been a number of absurd false flag attacks over the last 2 years. There is very strong reason to believe that the Zionists themselves are responsible for these terror attacks in an attempt to portray themselves as victims while their beloved Jewish colonial apartheid state commits genocide in Gaza. In one case, a Zionist entered a Muslim-owned cafe wearing a Star of David, accompanied by an undercover journalist from the Telegraph attempting to bait the owners into kicking him out for his Jewish identity.
A man wearing a Star of David cap walks in and orders a hibiscus tea. Seconds later, a senior journalist from the Daily Telegraph enters with her photographer and allegedly asks the same female server, "Have you got a problem with the man with the white cap?" She says, "Why would I have a problem?" It was all part of a stunt planned by the Daily Telegraph, allegedly called undercover operation.
In another case, Zionists recruited 2 crackheads desperate for money to spray "Kill the Jews" onto a car before firebombing it. People who knew the 2 crackheads claimed that they had never ever mentioned Israel or Palestine and had zero interest in geopolitics. They also tried to spray paint Israel on the car, but misspelled it. A number of arson attacks also took place at synagogues and restaurants, leading Australian officials to initially deem them as anti-Semitic terror attacks. After investigations, however, authorities determined that puppet masters were using the dark web to contact people desperate for money and offered them cryptocurrency in order to carry out the attacks. Now, Israel claims that it assisted Australia during the course of the investigations and determined that Iran was behind the attacks. Of course, they never provided any evidence of this, and it's far more likely that Israel itself orchestrated these attacks, as it has orchestrated many others before, and then pressured the Australian government to blame it on Iran. Now, with the recent attacks at Bondi Beach, the internet is ablaze with claims of it being a false flag. Naturally, of course, the Zionists are calling these claims anti-Semitic, but the reality is that their long documented history of carrying out or threatening these terror attacks has made the public deeply distrustful. And you know what? It's their own fault. Not only because historically they have been guilty of these actions, but because the Mossad openly brags about their violence, terror, and trickery on television.
We create a pretend world. We are a global production company. We write the screenplay, we're the directors, we're the producers, we're the main actors. The world is our stage.
Its motto from Proverbs 24:6 says in so many words, wage war through deception and trickery.
Now, this is just scratching the surface of the undercover false flag terrorism that Zionists are guilty of. What they've done could probably fill a Peter Jackson-directed extended cut trilogy. The takeaway from all of this is very simple. These people are evil with too many schemes and plots to count. People have noticed, and they're not buying it anymore. It's the classic tale of the boy who cried wolf. A shepherd repeatedly tricks villagers into believing that a wolf is attacking his flock. When a real wolf finally appears, however, and the boy cries for help, the villagers dismiss it as another lie, allowing the wolf to devour the sheep. Now, I don't think we need to run around calling everything an Israeli false flag. I think it's enough to simply expose their long, well-documented history of these terror attacks and trickery. After that, people can simply trust their instincts. And I think that's what's happening right now. Maybe that's why people see this and dismiss it entirely as just another piece of performative propaganda by a professional crisis actor. But what do you think? Let me know in the comment section. I want to give a very special shout out to my propagandist members who subscribed to the YouTube channel. As you know, my videos can be quite controversial, which often leads to YouTube censoring my content, demonetizing it, and one day perhaps, God forbid, deplatforming me entirely. So if you're not a member and you like my work, I highly encourage you to become a propagandist and subscribe to my YouTube channel so I can keep cutting through the propaganda. As always, thanks for watching and take care of yourself.
Trust nothing.